I read over 150 books a year, but I find myself only recommending a handful of them. So today I want to share the 10 books that have genuinely changed the way that I think, work, and live. So grab your cup of tea and let's talk about the 10 books that I keep coming back to. In today's episode, I'm going to be grouping these 10 book recommendations into 5 key categories. So, my first recommendation in the execution and high performance space should come as no surprise to anyone who follows this channel, and that is The 12-Week Year by Brian P. Moran and Michael Lennington. This book is a complete paradigm shift. It will change the way that you perceive time. It gets you to completely reframe what you have been conditioned to believe is a year, when in fact calendars have often changed throughout history. And what is really important about this reframe is that it allows you to capture that urgency, that motivation that you feel at the start of the year or at the end of the year, and to carry that motivation through with you for the duration of the year. And it gives you a really simple system to be able to create weekly accountability for whatever your top goals are. The 12-Week Year is a book that I have reread at least 3 times that I can remember, and I plan to continue to reread it. If you want to learn more about the top takeaways from the book before you read it yourself, then make sure you check out my earlier episode on this topic where I break down the key concepts that I have found the most useful in more detail. My next book recommendation in the execution and the high performance space is The 10X Rule by Cardone. Now, this is another book that completely shifted my thinking. This is a book that made me immediately, as I was reading it, redefine all of the goals that I had set for myself. It challenges you to think bigger and bolder for those goals. And not just the goals themselves, but the actions that are required to achieve those goals. So it gets you to stop underestimating what it is that you are capable of or what you should be aiming for, and also to stop underestimating the actions that are required to achieve those things, plus the level of resilience that is required for you to achieve whatever your biggest goals are. So this is less about generic motivation and really about completely recalibrating your goal setting process. Again, this is a book that I love to reread and I recommend to all of my personal brand coaching clients because I genuinely think that this has the potential to change your life if you apply the concepts within it. I have shared more about the 10X rule in detail in another episode as well, so make sure you check out that too. My next book recommendation in the execution and the high performance space is The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. This is another book that I absolutely loved, and it really stayed with me for such a long time after I read it because I find myself coming back to a mantra that I can't even remember if they actually say this in the book or if this is just something that I came away with. And it is this idea of being willing to do the things that other people aren't willing to do. So this isn't a book about the huge, big, bold actions that you can take to achieve your goals. The premise is that quantum leaps actually happen in your everyday actions and in your everyday choices. And that every time you take a particular action, you are casting a vote in a direction. You're casting a vote that is either going to take you closer to the person that you want to be or further away from that person. And those differences or the results or the outcomes of those actions are going to usually be pretty imperceivable at the time. You're most likely not going to be able to see the results of those actions straight away. But over time, they do compound, and they are either going to compound into mediocrity or they are going to compound into mastery. You're either going to be closer to your goal or further away from it. Having this mindset of the slight edge from the beginning is this really nice gift to your future self. It allows you to make sure that you are setting that person up for the best success possible. And again, because I really loved this book, this is a book that I also broke down in an earlier episode. So if you love the idea of the slight edge or arriving at your future self with a slight edge, then make sure you check out that episode as well. And my final recommendation in the execution and the high performance space is the book Limitless by Jim Kwik. Now, the beauty of the book Limitless is that you won't just learn from the book, but you will learn how to learn. That is one of the big key premises in the book. It's not just giving you information, it's giving you techniques that you can apply to learn better. And this is because the author, Jim Kwik, suffered a brain injury when he was really young. And a teacher once described him as the boy with the broken brain. So he had to really teach himself what the best way was for him to be able to learn. And he has since become a personal trainer for the brain. He is renowned across the world and is even used by A-list celebrities. And I really enjoyed learning the techniques in the book that he provides to be able to upgrade your mental capabilities. He talks about everything from speed reading to how to remember things to even things like recipes and nutrition and diet. So I would highly recommend the book Limitless as well. Now let's move on to category number 2, and that is identity, future self, and reinvention. So if you follow this channel, you would know that this next recommendation is a book that I stumbled upon more recently, and my only regret is that I didn't read this book sooner. I had heard of it, but I didn't actually read it until now, and I absolutely loved it. And that is The Alter Ego Effect by Todd Herman. Now, this is a book that helps you to explore the strategy and the science behind creating an alter ego, which is a high performance strategy that a lot of the world's elite performers use. So people from singers to elite athletes use this strategy of creating an alter ego. And it is something that I feel is an underappreciated technique for the everyday professional. Yet some of the most successful people in the world understand the power and the science behind creating an alter ego. Because it's not about creating this fake version of yourself. It's not about being inauthentic. It's about unlocking that potential that already exists within you to be able to do all of those things that you have maybe felt that you couldn't do in the past. It allows you to step in to that alter ego to be able to achieve whatever your biggest goals are. And in that book, you'll learn really practical tips about creating an alter ego. So everything from totems to artifacts to activation events, which are all things that I discuss in more detail in my earlier episode where I broke down my top takeaways from the book, The Alter Ego Effect. So if you are thinking about creating an alter ego, then check out that episode as well. And my second recommendation in the identity, future self, and reinvention space is the book Be Your Future Self Now by Benjamin Hardy. Now, Benjamin Hardy is a renowned psychologist. I believe it was him who was once the most followed person on Medium. And he often talks about this idea of a future self in his books. And that is because he believes that you can set goals as much as you like, but if you are setting them from the perspective of your current identity, if you are pursuing them from the perspective of your current identity, then there is always going to be a gap in your desired results. So he argues that in order to achieve whatever your goals are, then you need to have some level of identity change. He believes that we are too attached to the past and present versions of ourselves. And that is not to say that the present version of ourselves isn't important. It's not about not living in the present. It's about using the goals that you have for your future self to make decisions in your present self based on those goals. So it's almost similar to the slight edge in that if you have this future vision for yourself and you are thinking about that constantly in your present state, then your behavior and your identity is going to shift closer towards that thing while you are in your present circumstances and while you are taking your present actions. Now, this was a book that I shared in more detail in my recent episode on being your future self now. And that is because there was a story that I really loved in that book about Mr. Beast and this future self series that he did when he was younger and was a high schooler in his bedroom before he became the biggest creator on YouTube, before he amassed 500 million followers on YouTube as the biggest creator on the platform. So if you are interested in learning more about that story, then check out my earlier episode on that topic as well. So let's get into my category number 3, which is wealth, freedom, and leverage. Now, my first recommendation in this category should again come as no surprise to anyone who follows this channel, and that is the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And the reason that I love to recommend this book, which I try and usually read at least once a year, is because it's not, to me, a book about financial advice. And I believe I've heard Robert Kiyosaki himself from memory say this, but it is a book about financial literacy. So it is a book about empowering yourself to learn about concepts that will improve your financial circumstances. But what I really love about this book that almost doesn't have much to do with finance is that it is also about not always following the traditional path. That is exactly how the book is established. It is about these opposing dads and these opposing pathways that they took in life and the results that they were able to see from those choices that they made in their life. But it also taps into this idea of applying that beyond the financial space as well, to think beyond what the masses are doing, to think beyond what the crowd is doing. He talks about the poem, for example, by Robert Frost and The Road Less Traveled, and how we can explore these alternative pathways compared to what we are always conditioned to believe is the right thing to do. And I think whatever way you choose to apply that in your life, there are, for me anyway, some really valuable lessons in the book. So if you haven't already by chance read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, then make sure you check out that as well. I have an entire episode where I share my top 10 takeaways from the book. And all I can say is that there is a reason why this book has a cult following and why it has been consistently on recommendation lists and bestsellers lists for decades now. So if you haven't already, then make sure you learn more about Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And my next recommendation in the wealth, freedom, and leverage space is the book, The 4-Hour Work Week by Tim Ferriss. Now, this book in particular really speaks to the freedom element and the leverage element of this category. And again, this book has a cult following for a reason, and it has for such a long time now. And I think one of the really important things to not miss about this book, if you have seen the title but haven't read it yet, is that it's not just a book about productivity. It is about valuing your time as a currency. It is about valuing this thing that is so precious to all of us, yet so many of us unconsciously just give it away freely. He also talks about this idea, which I've talked about on this channel before and I keep coming back to, this concept of the new rich, and that the new rich are defined by one key characteristic, and that is the idea of unrestricted mobility. So they aren't chained to their desks. They aren't attached to their titles. They're doing meaningful work. They're working productively. And they're also able to live their life however it is that they choose, because they've set up these systems that are able to work for them while they're not. So that is a real focus of this book. It is setting up systems, things that improve both your effectiveness and your efficiency. Things like automation, for example, the things that are going to allow you to work more effectively so that you can also live the life that you want to be living at the same time. It is not about hustling at all costs. It's about living a really meaningful and enjoyable life while still also being productive. So my next category is communication, influence, and connection. And I only have one recommendation in this space because it is such an effective one, and that is the book How to Talk to Anyone by Leil, which I have shared on this channel before and I keep coming back to. And this is because this is a book that literally from the first few pages that I started to read it, I knew that I was about to get the social intelligence training or coaching that I didn't even know that I needed. And I genuinely really loved the way that it was written with such an engaging style and a witty style. And the book shares 92 little tips and techniques. And I remember actually meeting my friend the morning that I had started to read it, and I mentioned it to her straight away because I couldn't believe how well written this book was and how engaging and memorable the ideas that she shares in the book were. So things that I've mentioned on this channel before, such as a flatting smile, the idea of sticky eyes, or a big baby turn, are just a snapshot into some of the things that you will take away from this book. So if you want to learn more about what my top takeaways were from the book of the 92 tips that Lowndes shares, then check out my earlier episode on this book as well. And my final category is knowledge management systems. And again, I only have one recommendation in this space because this is going to genuinely change the way that you organize yourself. And not even that, but setting your future self up for success as well. And that is the book Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte. Now, one of my key takeaways from this book is that information doesn't necessarily come to you when you most need it. So the idea behind building a second brain and the code formula that Tiago Forte shares in the book is to create a system, a very simple system that allows you to capture that information for the benefit of your future self. And that allows you to retain that information and allow that idea to simmer until it actually has its moment. You have a system that allows you to access those ideas and that information whenever you need it most. Thanks so much. For more on how I read 150 books a year, then check out my earlier episode on this. I'll see you in the next episode.